Hi, and welcome to the ADHD Dopamine Collective. I'm Rhonda Estling, licensed therapist, late in life diagnosed ADHDer, and mom, struggling to figure it out right alongside you. This is a space for women who get it, the struggles, the wins, and everything in between. Let's get into it. In my career as a therapist, I can't even tell you how many times I've had women come into my office complaining of other symptoms, overwhelm, and really just thinking they're coming in for their anxiety or depression or just life is hard in this season, whatever season that they're in. And the reality is, they don't realize that they've just hit the point that the masking is no longer enough. Their system is overwhelmed to the point that they can no longer function by white knuckling it through the day. I have gotten so much better at recognizing these symptoms in women. When I first started in therapy, we didn't even know a lot of these things and that they were presenting in adult women in the ways that they were. When I first got into therapy, I don't even know that I could have had an adult woman diagnosed. I still struggle. There is a handful of providers where I can send women to for a fair ADHD assessment. And I think this is a pretty universal experience with other therapists as well. So today I want to talk you through what happens sort of in my brain when I hear certain things in the therapy space. Now, this doesn't always happen in the first session. It often can be over many, many sessions, and the pieces start sort of coming together in a way that makes a lot more sense to me as a therapist. And I'm going to, again, share the caveat that these are not diagnostic criteria. These are just things that'll perk my interest and asking more questions and potentially suggesting that a formal evaluation for ADHD may be helpful. This has been a game changer for a number of women. Many of these things, though, earlier in my career, I missed. And I missed them because I didn't know I had ADHD. I thought I had anxiety. That's what many of us were told. It's anxiety, it's depression. I didn't know that that was my way of coping, of masking. And so, even as a professional therapist, I didn't have the tools to see these in clients earlier on either. I do have a couple of clients that have since come back that I've been able to kind of walk through those different resources with, and it's been hugely helpful. So, I want to share this with you, and it may just help you frame a conversation with your therapist or even just curiosity about what's happening with yourself in a different way. So, here are different signs that maybe the person coming into my office has more going on than they know. Okay, so one of the first things that I will notice, especially with women, often with moms, but not always, is the chronic overwhelm. So someone will come into my office complaining that they feel like they can never catch up no matter what they do. There's just way too much on their plate. It's not situational, it feels baseline. Like they live in this constant state of chaos and overwhelm all of the time. So this can often be an indication of a couple of things. So oftentimes this is what gets women diagnosed with anxiety, is because they describe the overwhelm and that's clocked as anxiety. When in reality, it's not about worry over the outcomes. It's about a real struggle with the executive functioning involved in doing all these different tasks. And so this can be difficulty initiating tasks, organizing tasks, or sustaining effort. Those are the things when I start hearing that combined with chronic overwhelm that I start asking questions. Another piece of this is oftentimes women use that state of overwhelm as a dopamine producing agent, so to speak. So essentially, what that does is it keeps you in this elevated state of focus because you're in that fight or flight, right? This can also happen when there's constant chaos. Like there's always a chaotic situation happening around. This is one way a lot of women have learned to mask their ADHD symptoms as well. So this is one situation that will come up in therapy, and I will start getting curious, maybe ask some more questions about, is it possible that there's more going on than just anxiety and depression? So another one that is kind of a red flag, and not a red flag, but that I clock as having curiosity around, is an inability to engage in tasks without a real reason. So these are tasks that you want to do and you feel like you just can't force yourself to do. So this inability to begin without any logical reason or explanation is a hallmark of ADHD. And it's oftentimes called avoidance, procrastination, or a lack of motivation. But with someone who's neurodivergent, it's actually neurological. And it can be a sign that there's not enough dopamine to initiate motivation. It can be a sign that your system is overloaded and there are too many demands on it. So, this is one when, especially it's something that someone wants to do, but they can't force themselves to get started. That is definitely something that brings up some more questions for me in the therapy space. This is one of my favorites, and it's because it's one I also really struggle with. So, the next one is sensory concerns and overstimulation. Oftentimes, this comes up in moms. And oh my gosh, I remember during COVID, just the level of overstimulation that it felt like I was living in on a day-to-day basis. But it also includes things like your clothing, textures, background noise, light, strong smells, environmental factors. There's also research that suggests that women with ADHD, at least when it comes to sound and touch, tactile and auditory perception, they are at a higher risk of having sensory concerns related to those two areas than men and boys are. And so this is something that's often blamed on other things like autism, or just you explain it away like you can't power through, kids are loud, it's stressful, when in reality, this with other issues is a pretty clear indication for me that there's probably some level of neurodivergence going on. Again, this is not in and of itself a diagnostic criteria or something that I would point to and say, this is why. But it does definitely bring up a situation where I'm asking more questions. Okay, so here's one, again, that's often just blamed on anxiety. And in the past, before I knew I had ADHD, before I got better at asking questions about my clients and their experience, um, I also would call this anxiety and not ADHD. And that is overthinking and racing thoughts. So if I have a client that comes in and she's talking about how her mind is constantly racing, it's going a million miles an hour. She can't slow it down. She may plan obsessively for hypothetical scenarios. It makes it difficult to sleep, or even she'll wake up in the middle of the night and she can't slow the thoughts down. If it feels like there's too much in her head at once, she can't hold on to all the things. While this is often described as anxiety, and it can be, in ADHD, this is not necessarily about catastrophic thinking, but restless mental activity. So the intensity can kind of go to a fear anxiety place, and many women definitely use anxiety to mask their ADHD. But there are a lot of scenarios where overthinking and racing thoughts are actually a sign of ADHD and not just anxiety, or the anxiety piece is a symptom of the ADHD, but the real cause for the speed with which that brain is processing and going and doesn't have a slowdown button is actually ADHD. Again, the next one is one, especially if it happens around the house, is often laughed away, feels like it's just an inability to keep up or manage or push through. And that is frequent distractions and attention variability. I know how many times we joke about starting the laundry, forgetting it, walking into a room, not remembering why you're in there, not being able to complete something. Say you're cleaning a room, but then you get distracted because it needs dusted, and then the ceiling fan needs to be fixed. And then, oh, yeah, there's a light bulb out and you need to do the light bulb, and you forget where you started. This can be attributed to a lot of things, and oftentimes this is something that comes up in my office because someone feels embarrassed about it, and they don't like sharing it with other people or don't want other people to know about it because they think it's just a normal thing that people struggle with. When in reality, this ability to connect the things that you're doing or sustain focus on the priority in that space or what the job at hand is related to executive functioning. And this could honestly just be your brain being incapable of connecting all those dots. So the flip side of the variable attention is the hyperfocus. And this is something, again, this is an aspect of ADHD that so many of us really love if we're able to harness it. And it's one of the reasons why some women are afraid to treat their ADHD, because a big part of how they've been as successful as they have is the use of the hyperfocus. So this is when you can get so absorbed in an interesting task, something that you feel passionate about, or a topic that has some novelty to you, and you forget to eat. You lose track of time. Nothing else exists. You don't go to the bathroom until it's like urgent that you go. This can feel amazing, especially if you're being productive. Like the ability to organize a closet and it feel good to be in that space and you're in that flow. And it is hard to clock this as a problem for a lot of people because it feels so good. This is also part of what gets tricky because people think they don't have ADHD because they have hyperfocus. And in fact, this is not a contraindication of ADHD. And again, this is where the attention piece is so focused on that it's an attention disorder that it really does a disservice. So the brain locks onto something stimulating. And this stimulating input takes over everything, and it makes it really hard to disengage and focus on lower stimulation tasks. It's still a regulation issue. It's just a regulation issue that allows you to hyper focus on the very stimulating thing. And so it still interferes with the ability to sort of right size or regulate your focus, right? You can only hyper focus for so long as well. And you can't always control when or how you hyper focus, as many of you who have experienced it probably already know. So another sort of high spidey sense tingling situation is when a client reports that there's a prior diagnosis of anxiety or depression and that treatment's been largely ineffective, whether that's medication or therapy or other holistic treatments. Nothing seems to have helped. Oftentimes a client will feel like maybe tools and coping skills, and maybe they've helped in small stints, but haven't been sustainable. So the anxiety comes back. They still have these cycles of depression. They still experience the burnout, right? There's also this piece, especially for women with ADHD who maybe were raised to be good girls, where it feels like they're not being a good client because the follow through isn't there, because it's not working, because maybe they can't be consistent with recommendations. When in reality, all of this may be because the symptoms that are being treated are secondary and the bigger picture piece is being missed. And it really is a bigger picture piece when depression and anxiety is related to ADHD. It's such a different picture and situation, and it's a different level of radical acceptance and changing of systems that's required in those cases. All right. So another one that comes up is impulsive spending, travel, and projects. And these can feel justifiable, right? Like if you're struggling, if you were feeling really low, and so you book a last minute trip to Europe, and inherently these things are not bad. And I always have to say this, these are not bad things. People will look at these things as like, oh, I should be ashamed that I spent that money, or that I took on that project. I knew I wasn't going to finish it, or extravagant travel, and then it's temporary, the high wears off, whatever it may be. The impulsivity around these things is often shamed, especially in women. This is honestly just dopamine seeking. These are really big dopamine seeking things often, and it's just your brain. And there are lots of other ways that you can learn to do this as well. But ultimately, like, if these things work for your brain, it may be that they're a dessert and not an all the time go to for dopamine. But these are things people will often sit in my office and feel a lot of shame around, right? Like they're a bad person because they're spending all this money and they don't know why and they can't stop. And this is definitely one that we work through a lot within my therapy office. But usually it kind of raises that, like, I wonder if there's a reason why this feels so impulsive for you. And it's not just, I'm sad and I want to spend money, right? All right. Next up, using screens to dissociate and reset. I know this is something people are going to be like, well, everybody uses screens to dissociate and reset. And I hear you. I do think screens have become sort of a go-to for many people. The thing with neurodivergent folks is that the way that our brains are wired, screens can be uniquely problematic. And the reason is that it's a quick hit of dopamine. It doesn't require a lot of work. It's kind of that why fast food sometimes becomes a problem, because it's easy and it feels fast and you don't have to work for it, right? But longer term, you don't necessarily feel better. But in the moment, it feels accessible, where maybe something else doesn't feel as accessible. So again, this isn't something that we shame here at all. Sometimes everybody needs a break to decompress or to turn off your brain. Sometimes it feels like this is the only thing. And I recently heard someone that was talking about how the scrolling really becomes a problem for them when they feel isolated, not of their choosing. And that resonated with me because when I'm sort of stuck at home with my kids, my husband's a CPA, maybe it's tax season, he's gone, and it feels like those endless days stuck in the house with the kids. It's like snowing outside and nobody wants to go anywhere and I'm overstimulated. And those do tend to be the times where I find that I scroll the most, because it feels like you're connecting, but you're really not. And it doesn't actually help with the isolation and loneliness. But this is something like our brains just naturally can really grab onto. And if you have kids with screens who are also neurodivergent, you probably notice that it does affect them differently. We just recently had a screen-free weekend, and when you have neurodivergent kids, a screen-free weekend is the best. You can't do it all the time. It's really stressful, and there's a lot of demands on your nervous system as well. But it can feel so liberating. It feels like for me anyway, I get to watch them go back to themselves, their creative, playful selves. They remember how to be kids, how to play, how to just try something, experiment, instead of looking for someone else to tell them how to do things. And it is so refreshing. Again, there can be increased demands on my nervous system during those weekends. I have a sensory seeker and she wants to do more and more and more. And oftentimes that can feel like a lot of pressure. So this isn't an all the time thing. This isn't like I'm a great parent, I take screens away. Not at all. But you will notice, at least I do, that their brains are so affected. Their nervous systems are so affected by screens. And then I can see it in myself as well. But again, this is something that's up and down. It's a challenge for so many people. And when people come into my office complaining of this, being able to normalize while also helping see it in a different way can be really impactful. But this is one of the things, especially when it feels outside of their control, that makes me start asking some more questions as well. Okay, here's a good one as well. They're all good ones. I don't know how to, again, this actually makes sense with this one. So, this is a struggle to prioritize tasks, money, and time. And I was just about to say, it's hard for me to pick one that's like the most important. So, this is when everything feels urgent, right? Or nothing feels urgent. You have a list and you don't know where to start. That's something I often hear from my kiddo, like when it's time to clean her room, right? Like, I don't even know where to start. It's overwhelming. I can't just pick something and go. It feels paralyzing. So, prioritization requires executive functioning. This is a working memory, time perception, emotional regulation thing. You need a lot of moving pieces in order to sort of look through or think through a list and decide what's the priority, what do I have the effort and time to do, and it also requires remembering from last time what that required. All of these things can be a real challenge for people with ADHD. So, if I have someone that's coming in and complaining that they can't figure out how to like pay their bills, they pay the wrong one before another one, they are really struggling with doing things that are important, like high stakes, there's a clear priority there, and they get distracted by low stakes things on the list and hyper focus on that and don't get the big thing done. These can be indications for me in the therapy room that there's potentially some neurodivergence happening. Again, these are not clear diagnostic criteria, but it does show me that there's some executive functioning pieces here, and maybe more questions need to be asked. So, this next one, I feel like is one we don't talk about very often. It's a piece that's really missed in the conversations about how ADHD actually shows up in people. So, this is one that a client will come into my office and they will talk to me about how they feel like they're moving through life performing and that nobody really knows them and they feel like an outsider and they don't fit in. Generally speaking, they just feel really unseen. And this is something a lot of neurodivergent women really struggle with that we don't talk about enough. So, in addition to that, these people are often very aware of how they present in the world, how others perceive them, and how there's a gap between who they believe they are and who others see them as, or they feel like they don't know who they are because they're always putting on some kind of a performance or a mask for everybody else. But they kind of lost sight of who they are as a person. So this is oftentimes a big red flag that there's some chronic masking happening, that this is a person who has created different sort of versions of themselves for situations and people throughout their life, without even realizing that that's what they're doing. And they've probably done it since they were very, very young. So when this starts coming in the room, again, there's a lot of just curiosity. And also, this is one where sometimes I'll wait a while before I'll push back. And in all of these cases, me questioning or asking about, is it possible you're neurodivergent or have you thought about an evaluation? That is always going to be dependent on the relationship, on the therapeutic relationship that I have with that person, on my assessment of if they are ready to have that conversation. I even do that with friends. If I see something in a friend's kid or even in them that they're struggling with, generally speaking, I'm not going to say anything unless that person comes up to me asking for help because it's not my business and it's going to be received differently from different people. And so it's really important to me that someone is ready for or wanting that information or curiosity before I share it. And again, I'm not always right. These are just things that for me start to raise some questions. Okay. But the masking one, it can feel really unsafe in someone's system to start questioning the mask, especially if they're high achieving, especially if their role as like a really good parent is super important to them. They often believe this is normal and that everybody does this. And it's going to take quite a lot of time to get to a point of realizing the toll that that actually takes on you, energy wise. uh, High maskers are often the most exhausted people at the end of the day. Like, and I can clock this because I used to be one. And this is a piece I've worked really systematically over time on unmasking in situations where it feels safe for me to do that and realizing the drain that it really did have on my energy and resources. So it makes me more capable, I feel like, to see it in other people. Again, if you had told me 10 years ago that I had ADHD and I was masking, I would have told you you're nuts. So that also informs how I approach it with my clients when they come in the door. But this is also the piece for clients who are just feeling really burnout and at their wits' end and feel like there's no hope in sight. This is the piece that can change the entire script for them and can be incredibly impactful. So I'm going to kind of leave that there. This is oftentimes a sensitive topic to bring up, but at the same time can be one of the most impactful when it comes to depressive symptoms and the burnout cycle for sure. Okay. Ooh, I know I keep doing that. All of these are so important, but this is one that I get frequently. And I think it's because I'm seen as an expert on human behavior. I'm an expert on what other people do, right? Like I'm sharing space with people and their experience day in and day out. So if I have a woman who comes in and she is comparing herself to others and seeking validation that that's normal, I'll kind of go back to being able to finish a task all the way through without being distracted. So say a woman comes in and she's like, well, I mean, yeah, housework is kind of a struggle. Like I'll start laundry and I'll forget it's in there, but like that's normal. Everybody struggles with that, right? Or, when my kid cries, like it feels like I'm like panicking inside. Like I can't handle that sound and I just want to get away from it. But, crying is hard for everyone. And I just have to find a way to cope, right? That's normal. Things like that where it feels like they're saying that's normal, right? Because they want validation that they're normal. But underneath that, they really know that maybe it's not normal. Maybe not everybody struggles in the way they do, or they're trying to hold themselves to a standard that's based in a neurotypical functioning nervous system. This is also coming from a lifetime of having your symptoms minimized. And a lot of women experience that piece of it as well. I mean, I remember being told when I had my first baby, I think, and she was really colicky. I didn't realize she was often probably overstimulated and dysregulated, and there wasn't a lot I could do at that time to soothe her. And I was seeking comfort or talking through just how stressful it was for me when she would get to crying and how I couldn't handle the sound. And I was told by an older woman in my life that, well, people who can't handle loud noises, probably shouldn't have kids. You can't be a parent if you can't handle loud noises. And I remember how hard that was to hear. And it made me question myself too, like, oh, well, I'm just not good at just dealing with it. I am being too dramatic about this, or I just am not strong enough to handle my baby crying. And that must make me not a very good mom, right? Like, this is coming from a lifetime of people who are likely good intention, like trying to make you feel better, but really are just minimizing your experience because they don't understand. So, seeking this validation, and the reason why I bring this one up is because in therapy, it's so counter to what we're trying to do there that it stands out like a sore thumb. When someone comes in and they're like, but everybody does that, right? Or I'm not crazy for thinking this. Like, this is how it should be. Um, Looking to me to oftentimes even like hold some standard over them, hold them up to some kind of a standard or something. But for me, there's not much that is internalized about that. That is looking out around you and trying to compare yourself to other people. And it's kind of the opposite of what we're trying to do in therapy. Anyway, so it does really stick out when it comes up in the therapy space. This is one that actually gets people to the point of diagnosis and understanding themselves. And again, this is part of my story as well. If you've listened to some of my other episodes, you probably already know this. And that is raising a neurodivergent child that she identifies with. So oftentimes I'll get moms in my office that are in here for support because they're struggling or having a difficult time parenting their neurodivergent child. And when we talk through like what might be going on with that child in a different way, right? When I can sort of explore with them, well, maybe instead of this assumption that you have about that behavior, is it possible that there's something else going on? Maybe this, maybe that. And that becomes sort of like the light bulb for them because they hear their experience reflected back to them about their child. And I had this experience when my child was formally assessed. I learned so much about my own experience that I still didn't know. So this can bring up a lot in the therapy space that then we'll talk through, like grief and validation and feeling like they finally have a morsel of understanding of what's going on for them. And it often happens through their kids' experience and their experience with their kids. So the next one, you notice I'm not numbering. I'm not even going to try to keep track of how many this is because that would be too organized and I'd probably miss a number. But so this is, again, something that comes into my office that people feel like is a disqualifier for an ADHD diagnosis. And in fact, for me, it's one that often sparks the questions, right? So this is when I have a very highly intelligent woman with episodes of emotional dysregulation. This is someone that's articulate. She's insightful. She intellectualizes a lot of her experience. She can tell me all about what's going on in her experience, what she does, what she should do. She seems like she knows what's going on. She's likely even been through therapy and has all the language and the words, but there are disproportionate emotional reactions, meltdowns, explosive frustration. This is someone who maybe can externalize or intellectualize her thoughts and feelings and experience, but it's much harder to connect internally and actually process the feelings. Emotional dysregulation, really common with ADHD. It's a core feature. And this can be masked by intelligence, by, again, intellectualizing your thoughts and feelings. When I first started therapy, it was really hard to get out of my head and into my body, and it's still a struggle. And something that I've really been going kind of in circles around in my therapy spaces is if some of these modalities just need to look different for folks who are neurodivergent. Because I've noticed that trying to bypass the brain to get to the body, right? Like if it's a somatic or parts or whatever the modality you may be using, we're just taught that only processing in your head isn't really going to affect change. The problem with that is with a lot of highly intellectual, neurodivergent folks, that feels nearly impossible to bypass your brain. And something that I've really noticed and I'm learning and have a lot of curiosity around and feel like we're going to learn more and more about is how to coexist with that brain and still be able to connect with the body. in a way that feels respectful to your system. Because I don't think just trying to like eliminate the thoughts to try to get to the feelings works for a lot of neurodivergent folks. They have to coexist in some kind of way. And it's figuring out how that works for them that's tricky. And the emotional dysregulation often happens because the cognitive load gets to be too much, right? Like too much is trying to be processed in the brain at once, or there's too many demands on the nervous system. And so then the whole thing blows up. Your capacity is gone. So oftentimes it's also being able to clock the capacity piece of this for highly intelligent women. All right, this kind of goes hand in hand with a couple of our other ones, and that is women who are a rock star at work but can barely function at home. So this is often, again, a sign of high masking, where at work, you know what your role is, you know what the expectations are, you have structure, you have limits, you have routines, and you have deadlines. And some neurodivergent, high masking women, especially in high demand work environments, can meet that demand in a way that forces hyperfocus and be very, very successful at work. And this is where it gets tricky, is that the flip side of that is when we talked earlier about masking, we talked about the impact that has on draining resources. Literally, there is nothing left when you are done at the end of the day. If you are using that, tapping into that in order to be highly functional at work, there's not much left for you at home, for your family at home, for your responsibilities at home. And when I hear this, when I hear like, I am a corporate VP with a team of people under me, and I hold these high level meetings, and I am trusted, and I know what I'm doing, and I know what I'm talking about. And then I get home and it's like, I can't even figure out how to get a simple, like, get into a routine of doing my dishes or of cleaning my house or putting away my laundry or things that they're judging themselves about because they're not hard. Well, the reality is it's not that they can't figure out how to do it, it's the resources are gone. And it's that burnout cycle. So even on the weekends, right, when they're not at work, they're recovering from work of the week. Anytime that they're out of that environment, they are recovering because there's nothing left. So these are the clients when they come into my office. And oftentimes this will bring clients into my office because sometimes then it starts like bleeding over into work. And they're like, I don't know why sometimes I can't work at that level. Then this is something that comes into my office for therapy. All right. If you've known me for any level of time or watched any of my social media presence, you will know this about me. And this is one that I will get going with clients on, and it's sort of a clear like path to questions. And that is hobby hopping. Hobby hopping. So this is someone who gets intensely excited about new interests, buys all the supplies, watches the tutorials, tells everybody about it. And then within days, weeks, months, whatever, the interest fades and there's a closet full of unfinished products. These are the people where I'll often hear like collecting the tools or the hobbies is different. It's a different hobby than doing the hobby, right? Like acquiring the fabric is a different hobby than sewing the things. It's the excitement, it's the dopamine, it's the novelty of learning something new. Again, this is not a bad thing. In fact, if you can find a way to have radical acceptance around this, some limits in place, especially if there's some financial barriers or time barriers, having some like built-in limits around this self-imposed can be really helpful in allowing you to chase your dopamine, like chase those butterflies in a non-judgmental kind of way. That flow state, when you're going from one interest to another, can be some of the most creative time because you're tapping into different parts of your experience. You're learning about different things. And if you know anything about a neurodivergent brain, oftentimes we're really good at making connections from lots of different things. And it's like all of these novelties, bringing in new things, gives you more ammo, more sort of depth to connect other things too, right? It gives you more context about the world around you. And so this can be a really amazing thing as long as it doesn't become impossible to sustain, whether it's financially, time wise, or if you're really beating up on yourself and it's causing you stress and anxiety, then it can become something that's a burden to you rather than being able to lean into something that feels like one of the most natural ways for your system to operate. Okay. So the last one that we're going to talk about today, and again, this kind of goes with a few of the other ones that we've talked about, but I really want to bring attention to a cycle of burnout that I will hear about in my office specifically. And this can happen in any area of someone's life. But if I start hearing this pattern, this cycle, it is sort of a spidey sense that I need to ask some more questions about what's going on and potentially even extend some curiosity around a further diagnosis for ADHD. So these are people who are high functioning in bursts. So you'll have bursts of time where you're really creative, really productive, clear, focused. You feel unstoppable, right? Like you are lighting the world on fire. I love those lighting the world on fire days. But then the crash comes. And you'll have days where you're paralyzed, where you can't get off the couch, where you don't feel like you can do anything. You withdraw, you don't want to go anywhere or see anyone. And it's like you're two different people. And this is something that in the past and continues to, I don't want to say just in the past, but continues to lead to women often being misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder who actually have ADHD. And that's not to say that some of these women don't have bipolar disorder. They're just two very different presentations, but it can be hard to differentiate between the two. So again, this is when I say I have curiosity, but this is not a one and done diagnostic criteria. Okay. So ADHD burnout is real. This variable focus and attention and energy and the burnout cycle, treatment resistant depression and chronic fatigue. These are all things that are experienced by so many women who are struggling with ADHD. And this is where this burnout cycle, I feel like we talk about this so often, like, oh, she's burnt out. Oh, you're burnt out. And it kind of loses the point because often in those contexts, it's like, oh, you're tired and you just need to take care of yourself. This burnout cycle is something that feels really beyond someone's control. And again, part of this being how, number one, we've learned to cope. It's the result of living in systems that aren't built for you and your nervous system and your brain, which crave chasing the dopamine when it's available and resting and caring for yourself when it's not. The level of demand can often lead to such a depletion in your capacity that your resources are entirely gone. That is the level of burnout fatigue that you experience. Literally, I cannot move today. I don't think I can get out of bed. And that can be exacerbated by guilt, shame, all kinds of different things that often find their way in my office. But when I really start hearing about this burnout cycle happening in a pattern where it's not a one-time thing, it's not related to a situation that was stressful at work or a project that was super demanding, but there's just like this constant cycle happening for women, that's when I start asking more questions about what that looks like and what their experience is like with that. So I'm going to wrap up today by sharing a little something about that word normal. And again, hearkening back a little bit to the part of this conversation where I said women will often come into my office asking if something's normal. Is that normal? I've spent years sitting with people in my office. And when I say everything that I hear has been experienced by other people in that office, it pretty much has. Um, the experience can be real and valid, and there's nothing about it being normal or not normal. That context doesn't really work. So I'm going to say many women have spent most of their life wondering if what they're experiencing is real, is normal, is exaggerated, is overdramatic. And oftentimes in my office, in therapy, it's the first time that they can actually ask the question out loud or say something like, I don't know why I'm like this. And for me as a therapist, being able to sit with clients getting to that place for the first time, to that openness where they feel safe enough to really start asking the question, that's something that I feel really honored by and also take with a lot of responsibility. I want to make it clear that when I make this list of, of spidey sense inducing symptoms, I want to make it clear that this is not a list of problems with you. This is not a list of things that I feel like need to be solved and fixed. And like, that's the treatment plan of therapy. It's just an opening. These are things that I can be curious about to understand more and also to make clear that there's no quick answers for any of this. And that can often be a really powerful thing to offer to someone is that this is not a one and done. This isn't here's the problem, here's the solution, and this is what it's going to look like when you're better. Oftentimes, this is an experiment of being curious about something, trying something, seeing how that lands or doesn't land, but in a safe place where no matter what, it's going to be okay. And that's the piece that I want to make clear. If any of these situations or scenarios that I have shared today comes up for you in a way that feels like you identify with it, or that it could have been you saying those things or identifying those things in your life, that does not mean that there's something wrong with you, that there's a problem that needs to be fixed. That may mean that the way that you experience the world is different than what you grew up knowing, understanding, and learning. And so what you need to navigate those things may be different. Again, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint, and it's one big experiment. And the reality is it's all okay. And you getting to a place of really understanding yourself and having some grace with yourself is going to be a big open door in order for you to be able to figure out how to do things differently so they cause you less distress. That's usually the goal. That's the goal for therapy, is to help clients get to a place where their systems, their lives, their relationships, their functioning isn't causing them undue distress. And they're learning how to do things in a different way that actually works for them. So I want to just share that. Again, if any of these things resonate with you, I want to hear from you. Make sure you sign up for the mailing list, and you're always welcome to respond to any emails you receive with your thoughts and insights and questions. If you are hearing things here that sound like, that might be me, it may be time for you to reach out, find a therapist, maybe even talk to your primary care physician about those symptoms. And there are lots of resources online too. You can find those in the show notes. And make sure you also like and rate the podcast so that other women can find these resources as well. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. If this episode hit home for you, share it with someone else who may need to hear it. And come find the rest of the conversation. All of my links are in my Linktree / Rhonda Estling ADHD coach. I'll see you next time.